May 7th, 2026. We are in the 5th year, day 73 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome to the Situation Report. In today's report, we see fear of drone attacks on May 9th once again, and now it's escalating completely. More on that in the report. But we are also seeing attacks on Latvia by Russian drones. That is particularly interesting. And what we will also look at, of course, is the situation on the front line, because a lot has happened in the Usumni area, as well as much more. By the way, today Pat, who regularly travels for us in Ukraine, forwarded me a message from one of our viewers. Many greetings to you. I know you're watching right now. Thanks to her support together with Ukraine for Berlin, another aid shipment has arrived. Among other things, it included a large number of fire extinguishers and many other important devices. I'd like to take this opportunity to point out an update on Pat's GoFundMe page. The link for that is in the description. Feel free to check it out. You'll always stay up to date there, and you can also support him with a small donation for his trips, which he usually finances himself. And now, back to the situation report. Russia claims to have captured the border village of Miropilya in the Sumy region. The Russian defense minister has already spoken of the liberation of the place, even though to this day, the usual proof videos are missing, which Moscow normally uses to propagandistically exploit even the smallest territorial gains. Instead of footage of Russian flags in the town, suddenly there were only stories about supposedly successful assaults. And that's exactly what seems very conspicuous, because according to geolocation data, Russian forces are still several kilometers south of the actual town. The Ukrainian defenders apparently still hold the dominant high ground around the town. Among them are the strategically important heights, 201, 204, and also 217. That's exactly where control of the area is determined. This shows a well-known problem with the Russian offensive. Moscow tries to report political successes faster than they are actually achieved militarily. How does that work? It's quite simple. They are continuously put under pressure. And who exactly? Yes, of course, everyone in the entire leadership structure. Moscow wants to see gains. The Kremlin orders that gains must be reported. And it goes on like this. It then goes to the general staff. They put pressure on the generals, who put pressure on the brigade commanders, who put pressure on the regiment commanders. And they put pressure on their company commanders, who put pressure on their platoon leaders, who put pressure on the squad leaders and then on the ordinary soldiers. And if the soldiers know that when they come back and haven't made any gains, they'll face punishment, then they simply report a gain. That goes to the officer. The officer then reports it up to the next higher ranking person. And then this just goes up the chain without being checked. And everyone at every level just reports a little more. That means if a soldier has actually gained 5 meters of land, his platoon leader reports 10 and his company commander just reports 1 kilometer. The regimental commander raises it to 10, and this continues up to the Kremlin. They don't know anything about the front here because they've never been on site. They don't know what's happening or the soldiers there. They only know what they've heard from others. And they shift the boundary line on the map and say, hey, look, we've captured that place. They report it further, but in reality, hardly anything has changed here. But the main thing is that the pressure was high, especially before symbolically important dates. The enormous pressure plays a big role in presenting progress, even if the situation at the front doesn't support these claims. But the Ukrainians have proof for this. They can show that they are still on the ground, even with a flag visible right in the middle. At the same time, it also becomes clear how costly even minimal Russian advances have become by now. Russian units have been attacking there for weeks with mechanized columns, assault troops, and former Wagner forces, as well as with soldiers from the so-called Tick-Tock Brigade Ahmad. Despite heavy losses, they haven't gained ground. That's why recent situation reports show no changes, even though attacks occurred. I mentioned this weeks ago. The front remains mostly unchanged, but fighting continues. If an offensive goes on for weeks and in the end only 1 or 2 kilometers of movement happen, it shows the enormous attrition on the Russian side. What's especially problematic for Moscow is that Ukraine can continue to fight from the elevated positions and still controls them. If these heights hold, Russian advances in open terrain stay vulnerable. That's exactly why the premature report about the capture of the villages seems less like a military success and more like an attempt to present operational stagnation as a political achievement. We know that the scaled-down parade on the Russian side already makes the Kremlin look pretty weak. We've covered this whole topic almost every day in the Situation Report over the past week. Now there's a small update. Since the leadership is obviously extremely afraid of a drone attack and doesn't see itself as able to fully defend against it, Russian state television is broadcasting a call for violence. Here, Russia is openly threatening to attack targets in Kiev if the parade on May 9th is disrupted by drones. Among the targets, we of course also see several embassies, including the Latvian, Japanese, and others. In the end, the German embassy is even shown again as a theoretical target alongside the American one. This could get interesting. You can tell they're scared shitless. As you would say in plain German, such a threat shows just how much fear there is of Ukrainian drones right now. But after more than 4 years of war, we also know that Russian threats usually remain just threats. Or have we already been wiped out several times by a nuclear strike as promised? Just like back then when we delivered weapons. Or back then when we delivered howitzers. Or back then when we supplied tanks or cruise missiles or rockets or any other kind of aid to Ukraine. Just look out the window. I don't think you'll see a city of ruins that's uninhabitable. Okay, maybe I'll take that back now. I've already been to some big German cities that come pretty close to that description. But those are exceptions. You see, the list of threats is quite long and the fear is quite high. But what's also pretty long is the list of parades that have already been canceled. In Kursk, Bryansk, Rostov, Saratov, Ryazan, Kaluga, Oryol, Pskov, Novgorod, Nizhny Novgorod, Krasnodar Krai, Slavyansk, and in some regions of Leningrad, the parades for May 9th have already been canceled, while the main parade in Moscow will not include any vehicles. By the way, Zelensky responds to all these threats with an indirect warning to foreign representatives who want to travel to Moscow. The message behind this is that Russia cannot guarantee complete security even during an important show of power. So far, only 2 foreign state representatives and 7 Russian citizens have confirmed their attendance. Most notably, these were the Sultan of Malaysia and the President of Laos. So we are seeing some really high-ranking figures at the parade. But what is the situation like in the skies right now? In the past 2 weeks, hundreds of drones and air defense activities have been documented around Moscow. According to the analyzed map from Drone Bomber, there were a total of 238 recorded incidents. In green, we see 131 recorded drone flights, and in red, 107 deployments of Russian air defense systems. Moscow is trying to create an image of total control around the capital, while the reality shows something different. The Russian air defense is constantly operating in a state of alert. If more than 100 air defense responses are needed within 2 weeks, that doesn't mean strength, but constant stress for the entire defense system. And above all, heavy ammunition expenditure, and that went on for 2 weeks before the parade. More concerning for the Kremlin is the high number of successful drone breaches. Apparently, it is still possible to overcome the first lines of defense and reach targets, or at least Moscow's airspace. This is highly sensitive, especially before the year's most important show of power. The military parade on the 9th depends on the image of absolute security and state control, and it is precisely this image that is being attacked. And this is happening long before the parade even takes place. Russia has to move more and more systems to Moscow, react more and more frantically, and at the same time accept that drones still get through. That shows how overloaded and fragmented the defense now appears. Instead of a closed protective shield, the impression is created of a system that only reacts to individual threats, but can no longer establish complete control. By the way, some bloggers, including H.C. Strian, have noticed an interesting gap in the northeast of the city. On the one hand, this points to the direction of previous drone attacks, but possibly also to the defensive capabilities of the air defense ring. By the way, we now have 376 channel members. Thank you very much for that. You are the ones who make this channel possible in the first place and cover a large part of the costs. Thank you very much for that. In Latvia, several drones entered the airspace during the night. 2 of them crashed in the east of the country. 1 triggered. A fire broke out at an oil depot in the Rizekni region, which was extinguished by the fire department. According to the Latvian army, the drones did not come from Ukraine, but were launched from Russia. That's exactly what makes the incident somewhat explosive. It's not even about a kind of crash, as we've seen in the past, but about a drone in the airspace of an EU and NATO state, which this time even caused damage. This means Russia is leaving traces of the war in both Ukraine and NATO territory. For Moscow, this is very dangerous. Russia is increasingly relying on drones, but such incidents show that this kind of warfare cannot be fully controlled. I'm not accusing Russia of this being an intentional attack, although of course that could also be the case. But there's also the possibility of stray drones, although the likelihood of them hitting oil depots is very low. And on the other hand, there's also the possibility of intentionally misdirected drones, for example through electronic jammers that give the drone a new GPS signal. That would be the other extreme. So for Latvia and the Baltic states, this isn't really abstract. When drones crash and cause fires, Russian aggression becomes a concrete security problem at NATO's border. Of course, you also have to say at this point, if Russia hadn't started this war, there wouldn't be a drone, for whatever reason, flying into an oil depot in Latvia right now. That's why these incidents mainly add pressure to air defense, border surveillance, and political deterrence. That's what we should prepare for here. Renewed drone attack targeted the oil pumping station in Perm.
Zufälliger Treffer, sondern Teil eines erkennbaren.
This is not just about damaging infrastructure. Here, the technical bottlenecks of the Russian energy system are being targeted. Perm is important because it's part of the main oil pipeline network. Even if such a hub has been hit repeatedly, it puts pressure on its repair capacities, transport routes, and security structures at the same time. Russia doesn't just have to put out fires and rebuild, if they even still do that, or if it's even still worth it. When we checked Perm before, it was already badly damaged after the last attack. But a certain message is being sent here, namely that Russia cannot reliably protect known targets in the hinterland. Similar to TUAPS, this looks like an attempt not just to disrupt a facility, but to destroy it piece by piece. If only a few tanks remained after previous attacks, then that shows that systematic destruction results from individual drone strikes. For Putin, this is of course politically uncomfortable. Such hits paint a picture of an uncontrollable situation in the midst of a supposedly well-protected state. And that's exactly the image they want to maintain, and that's exactly the image they want to maintain at the parade. And that gets a little harder every day. By the way, it's happening in 2 days. I'm already thinking about just live streaming it here. Maybe we'll notice something, but I don't think so. But the war is getting closer and closer to Russia's own center. This time, according to reports, the production and logistics complex NARA of the Russian Ministry of Defense in Narofominsk was attacked, so only a short distance from Moscow. The facility is extremely important. Military goods are stored and distributed there on a huge site. Equipment, supplies, logistics, and so on and so forth. At the same time, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that hundreds of Ukrainian drones were intercepted during the night. This included the area around Moscow, as we saw earlier. For a long time, Russia relied on the idea that the country's vast geographic depth would automatically provide security and that critical infrastructure would be far enough away to remain out of direct danger. How wrong one can be. That idea is holding up less and less. Ukraine now regularly demonstrates that even targets near Moscow are within reach. And every successful attack in such regions has not only military significance, but also a psychological impact. Because when even central logistics sites in the vicinity of the capital are attacked, it becomes clear that distance alone no longer guarantees protection. Thank you to all subscribers, channel members, and Albuquerque, with special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renica, Sila, Diddy, Ferdy, and Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next briefing.